Welcome to the third episode of Generation Gap Book Reviews. I'm Christy the mom.
And I'm Lena the daughter.
Today we're going to be reviewing actually a series of books, and the series is called A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. There are 3 books, and as far as I know, it's a complete series. There is a prequel that we have not read. I will not be reading. I can't speak for Lena.
I may read it eventually. I just haven't found too much interest in it yet.
And it'll be kind of interesting because Lena probably has a fairly steady final rating or something for the all 3 of the books in the series. Me, it vastly differs from a couple of the books to the third one, as we will get into. We're going to be very careful to not spoil anything. For one thing, the third book in this series, I struggle to explain my thoughts on it without spoiling. But also, when I review later books in a series, I don't mind spoiling earlier stuff in the series, basically with a warning early on to say, if you haven't read the early ones, you just may not want to read this review. But because we're reviewing all 3 of them in one podcast, we will be as careful as we can. Well, we're going to be careful to not spoil the earlier books as we talk about the later ones. So to start with, Lena, what first brought you to this book?
It's actually another book club book. Because I don't know if we knew like too far in advance, but it was gonna be one of the books like back in like early 2024 or late 2023 or something. And so yeah, that's what brought me to the series.
And I had heard of the book, mostly on other people's blogs, other book reviewers' blogs and such. And honestly, I don't think I really ever paid much attention to it because the title led me to think it was just not going to be the kind of book I would enjoy. But a few years back, Lena's she's in a book club still at the local library now, but and we're not doing this anymore. But the previous year, when she would read a book for book club, I would read it too because we'd use it as a school book because she's homeschooled, and we'd use it as a like a book report book for her. And I wanted to read them too to have some idea of what she was talking about when she told me about the book and such. So I decided to read it too, and I mean, I was really glad I did. I was pleasantly surprised by how it turned out. So before we go anywhere else, Lena, what rating? Let's start with the first book. Out of 5 stars, how many stars would you give the first book?
For the first book, I think I would give it a solid 5 stars. It was pretty good. I was like, this is a very good mystery.
Yep, and I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I mean, I've always been kind of a picky reader and rater of books. So 4.5 is a solid. I really enjoyed this book. Would you like to give the synopsis this time?
So basically, our main character, Pippa, is doing a senior project for her schooling, and she chooses this cold case from 5 years ago, where this girl was murdered, allegedly, by her boyfriend. And so she digs into that for her senior project with like a bunch of she's interviewing people and lists and all sorts of stuff.
And the boyfriend that allegedly killed her killed himself as well.
Oh yeah.
And Pippa, yeah, it's a smallish town, and so Pippa is interviewing a lot of people around town. And as you mentioned, the lists, what you mentioned when you're talking about lists, one of the things I thought was an interesting format to the book is that a lot of chapters would start with her kind of typing out her thoughts and her notes and stuff like that, because the project for her school is called a senior capstone project. Some people may know what those are because they did them in school. I don't remember ever having a capstone project, but anyway, so you would see her notes and her interview transcripts, stuff like that, and even emails. I think emails between her and like a teacher that was in charge of this project, who actually kind of kept trying to convince her to change her project and do something different because this was dangerous, or because she was disrupting people, like the family members of the family of the girl who died, and upsetting them basically. And the teacher didn't like it, from what I remember at least. So what's something that you remember really liking about the book, Lena?
I mean, the aspects of mystery were very interesting. I remember it being suspenseful because I was like, okay, what's gonna happen next? Kind of being on the edge of my seat because I was like, who is, you know, who did it? And just meeting, I feel like it was also interesting, like meeting these new people as she was interviewing them and seeing their stories on this. It was very interesting.
For my part, I mentioned before why I had passed on, I never really thought I'd read the book. I really thought it was going to just be some kind of shallow teen angsty book, and it turned out to be a fast-paced mystery that was engaging. I compare it to Veronica Mars. If anybody has seen the TV show Veronica Mars, which I love. I love that show. And this reminded me a lot of the way she would solve the overarching mysteries in this different in a few series of that show. Although Pip, the main character in this book, is a lot less jaded than Veronica Mars. But she rearranges all of her suspects and like as she goes and tries to figure out what's going on. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. Because I gave it 4.5 stars, probably should at least mention the reason that I took away a little half point is, I mean, I know Pip was a teenager. I believe she was supposed to be a senior. Well, the senior capstone project. So she was a senior in high school. She made some really stupid decisions, really, all the way up to the end. And I don't know if that was really a fault with her character, like if that was just that's her character, or if the writing wasn't very good, but it was enough to bug me just a little bit. And I also should mention, I'm going to mention now, even though this is the case for the whole series, this is really probably more what I would consider an older teen book. Lena is 14, and actually, how old were you when you actually read the book?
13.
And there is some language. There's definitely plenty of references to drug use and teen sex. Nothing explicit, but if you have a younger teen, or if you're concerned about what your teen reads, if you aren't a parent with a teen, of course, you might want to read it yourself first before you. I mean, I didn't, but it was recommended by the book club, so I really didn't have a whole lot of reason to be concerned at the time. So that's the first book, and the second book is called Good Girl, Bad Blood. And Lena, what did you think about the second book out of 5 stars, for example?
I think this one I didn't like as much as the first one, and I think I would give it like 4 stars, maybe 4.5.
Which is interesting because I gave it a 4. I gave it 4.5, just like the first one, and I actually think I liked it a smidge more than the first one, or at least as much. So in the second book, we pick up. I mean, it's pretty soon after the first one. About a month passes, I think.
Yeah.
Pippa and friend have started a podcast called A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, and they are basically the podcast is a limited run to share what happened in the case that was in the first book, which is something we won't explain.
Yeah.
But then during that time, the brother of one of Pip's good friends goes missing. His name was Jamie Reynolds. And because of the success of her podcast, his family asks her if she can use her audience to try to find him. At first, she doesn't really want to because she doesn't want to get caught up in another investigation. The first one definitely did a number on her and her family and such. But the police don't actually consider the disappearance a priority. So Pip knows she can't just leave her friends and his family without any answers. So she investigates. Mm-hmm. So Lena, can you give us some specifics about maybe what you didn't like as much about, but also what you liked, because 4 stars is still a good review.
I don't remember for sure. I think with what I didn't really care for, I feel like it was a little, maybe in my mind, a little slower than the first one. I mean, it was still a good mystery, and I still really enjoyed like how she figured things out, or like.
And maybe the fact that you don't remember it as much is indicative of the fact that you didn't like it as much. Maybe. Yeah. Although we're not going to get to this. I mean, we're not going into this one yet. But do you remember the third one better?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Well, that'll help us when we get there. Yeah. For my part, I think this to me, as weird as it might sound because of what else I'm about to say, this second book felt just a little more focused than the first one. She went down so many paths, there were so many red herrings and stuff in the first book before she figured it out, before she got to the solution. And I just feel like this one was maybe a little bit like I said, more focused. But I also really liked the way that the book merged updates, like the podcast they were putting out, and aftermath and stuff from the first book, from the first investigation, with this new investigation they were doing. And I guess I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, if it's part of why I liked it, or if it actually kind of detracts from it. But I actually pegged the main bad guy, pretty early in this book, which is not normal for me. Normally I just get swept along and I don't really figure out who done it before we get at least close to the end. But as with the other one, I give this one 4.5 stars, and this time there were I think a few things that just weren't really explained as well as they could have been. And even though I pegged the bad guy, it really might have just been because of like tropes of the genre. And in the end, I actually don't think, like, I didn't have any idea why. I didn't have a motive in mind at all, and I don't think the book really gave us a chance to come up with a motive ourselves. And I felt like Pip made some bad decisions. I had some issues with the ethical and legal lines she was willing to cross in this book, but otherwise, I enjoyed it quite a bit, and at that point I was still really looking forward to the third book. And that's a nice segue into me saying that the third book, which is called As Good as Dead, is where it all crashed down for me.
I, on the other hand, I still enjoyed it. I still would have given it, like, probably 4 stars.
Okay, so still not as much as the first one.
Yeah, still not as much as the first one.
And I remember, before I read it, you telling me that you liked it, but it was kind of depressing, I think is what you said.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Such an understatement. I gave this book 1.5 stars. If that's any indication to you of what I thought of it. However, let's get into what this book was about. So this third book, it doesn't have as much of its own mystery, or at least an unconnected mystery, because like the second book had wrap up and aftermath from the first, but it also had its own unrelated mystery. This third book, it's harder to even really give much of a synopsis without spoiling it, but essentially Pip finds herself, she's being stalked, or at least she thinks she's being stalked. I think the police basically poo-poo it, but as becomes a trend in this series, the police in this town don't really believe anything she says, and don't really believe that anything bad is like ever happening. I don't know. And I think it's not too spoilery to say that she gets onto the trail of what she thinks is the person is stalking her is somebody who has killed other people, who might be a serial killer. And that is pretty much all I can say at this point, I think.
So for liking it or disliking it, in my opinion, she has a bit of PTSD from the previous book.
Not just a bit. It's a lot.
It is a lot. It's kind of overwhelming in some aspects. And that kind of affected how parts of it that like I disliked about it. Just one of the few. It's kind of hard to get into details, you know.
Yeah, we have to be really vague on this one, but I agree that, I mean, what she went through at the end of the previous book, which of course we can't explain, led her into just some pretty severe PTSD, and I'm not saying it's not realistic, but it felt kind of overdone, and it definitely bogged the book down a lot, because she's falling apart, and she's dealing with it in all the worst ways. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that basically she starts getting into drug use. Mm-hmm. And it makes the first half or so of the book kind of slow, and the mystery she's kind of trying to work on almost takes a back seat, which is not what this series really set itself up to be. Mm-hmm. Then the mystery then is, to me at least, it's almost non-existent. She doesn't really do a lot in the way of solving it. It just kind of happens to her, and it doesn't really last through the whole book. And that's as much as I'll say, because I, again, don't want to spoil things. What did you like about it, though?
What did I like about it? I mean,
if you're having a hard time thinking about what you liked about it, maybe 4 stars is a little too high.
Yeah, maybe. I'm just trying to remember what I did like about it. I think it was like just like continued relationships she had with some people. Though I feel like with her PTSD, it was harder for like her to actually like be a friend. But I think it was still something I liked about it.
I wonder if, because you enjoyed the first two books, if you just really enjoyed revisiting the world, even though,
Oh yeah.
even if this plot, this story maybe didn't engage you as much, but you still
Mhm.
enjoyed visiting the world because you liked coming back to it, because you liked it
Yeah.
so much, the first book and such.
Yeah.
I mean, you do have more to say about it, about what you really didn't like, than you do about what you liked.
Yeah. That I can think of really.
I mean, it hasn't been that long since you read it.
I know.
You're still young. Your brain you shouldn't be forgetting stuff that much, unless it didn't stick with you that much.
I
Because
guess maybe, yeah.
now, I'm not trying to talk you out of saying you like the book. I just, you know, when you're still reading it, and when you're done reading it, and especially when you're at the end of like a book world that you enjoyed overall, you know, I think maybe sometimes your feelings can be kind of skewed. But again, I'm not trying to talk you out of liking it.
Mhm.
To at least try to touch on, I mentioned the first half of the book being really bogged down, and I'm not really enjoying it. But really, the 1.5 stars mostly comes from the second half of the book, and I really can't say much. But
Like nothing.
I think it's okay to say Pip crosses some major ethical and moral lines in this book. And I mentioned I was a little bothered by that in the first book, or in the second book, I mean, but this took a turn that just really disappointed me and frankly made me feel like I can't trust this author anymore.
Did you like anything about it?
No, not really. I gave it 1.5 stars, and maybe that's just because I hate giving a book just 1 star, because I mean, I used to think that the worst thing I could do give a book was 0 stars, but anywhere that you rate books, you can't give them 0. So 1 literally means I hated this book, and I hate doing that. So it's difficult exactly to say what led me to at least give it 1.5 stars, but for the most part, I finished this book and just felt betrayed and a little angry. So
I remember you ranting about it while you were reading it.
oh my gosh. Okay, well, since I can't say anything else, I suppose this would be a good point to end.
Yeah.
If the series sounds interesting, I definitely would say the first book is great. We both enjoyed that. The second book, I still really enjoyed, and Lena liked, just
Yeah,
not as much as the first. And at that point, I mean, you've got the momentum. You might as well keep going into the third, but don't say I didn't warn you.
Basically, yeah, just good luck with the third one if you end up wanting to read it. But I mean, also for like you said older teens for recommendations, which I do feel like I might have been a little too young to read it.
There were
But,
probably
like-
a lot of things that either you couldn't quite, you definitely couldn't relate to, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But that you might have felt a little uncomfortable with.
Yeah, a little bit.
And then what did you mention too about the third book? I forgot about that.
So like the whole series has bad words in it. But like the third one I felt like had a bit more, but I think that also relates to her PTSD maybe. That I don't know if it was like her doing it mostly, but I don't know.
So the third book kind of ramps up the language, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. So was there something somewhere else you were going with what you were saying about teens, or is that just what you were saying?
That's basically what I was saying, yeah.
That even the 14-year-old would really recommend this for older teens than herself, really. Not that you regret reading
I mean,
it.
older teens, like, maybe 14 at the least, and then, like, but, like, 17-year-olds might be more around the age.
Which is probably who more it's meant for, so.
Yeah, definitely.
So that wraps up our review for A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series, minus the prequel that we haven't read. Join us next time when we'll be reviewing On the Edge of the Dark Sea of Darkness, the first book in the Wingfeather Saga by Andrew Peterson. Ha, that's a name I actually remembered on my own.
Good job!
Until next time, I'm Christy.
And I'm Lena.
And this is
Generation Gap Book Reviews.